Okay, well, before we jump in, Joaquin, where are you, SCD? I just want to say we at Madrona totally agree with your statement about not enough venture capital here in this city and how much talent there is. We at Madrona, being one of the largest VCs here, feel like there should be more of us, for sure. So anyways, I just wanted to put an exclamation point on that. But it is wonderful to be here with my dear friend Martha. When I heard that Martha was the keynote here, I thought, wow, this is an important event. As well as I was thrilled for all of you because the times I get to sit with her are times that make me think. I always walk away with wisdom and pearls of wisdom that I want to contemplate and chew over. And she's just one of those people that makes you think differently and pushes you. And I love her frankness.
Thank you, Hope. Likewise, it's a privilege, number one, to be here, and Pablo and team for the invitation and to be here with you, and have a very interesting discussion. So I look forward to that.
She's someone you can ask anything to. There you go. So just so you know who you're talking with here, Martha's got quite an amazing background. In her operating career, she was at Nortel as an executive for a long time, then came to Microsoft. One of the things I love about her story to Microsoft is Microsoft was great, but really it brought her to Seattle where she fell in love with this part of the country. So she occupies both corners of the country, both Miami and Seattle. Also, Wipro is part of your journey. And then she's got an extensive board portfolio as well. She went to University of Miami in engineering.
Oh, that one? Hurricane. Forget about you. She decided.
She decided to add HBS to her resume, so she went there for a stint. And then, has had a big focus on ESG, both in her board roles, and she did some education there at Berkeley as well. And as you talk to Martha, that's a really important part of her journey. So Martha, maybe you can just walk us through so many different geographies in that journey. And
so many different geographies. So I do have an accent. My heritage is Cuban. We came to our great country in the 60s, and I am the youngest of four. I have three spoiled older brothers, and we were raised by a widow mom, and we grew up in Miami, and it was amazing. I married my high school sweetheart, who's also an engineer, and that took us. It took us to different parts of our country. We lived in Massachusetts. We lived in New Jersey. We were in Toronto. And then with Microsoft, we came over here when our kids were very young. And they grew up here in Seattle. We spent 17 years here. And a couple of years ago, we became empty nesters. And I've always felt that when you're super comfortable, you cannot stay put. You got to do something else. And so I had an opportunity to join a private equity group in Miami, Dagrosa Capital. And Joe Dagrosa called me and he said, hey, how about helping me with an alternative platform? I didn't even know what that was. So I said, yeah, I go, hey, give me a crash course on this. And we walked, so we have a place in Tumble Creek, which is about 90 miles from here. And we walked and walked and walked. And she is giving me these little golden, pearls. And I called Joe and I said, I'm going to do it. And we created an alternative platform. We have three verticals in our practice. We invest in soccer club teams. I'm part of that investment committee, but I don't really get into the details of that. We also invest in real estate, ultra luxury real estate in South Florida. And I'm part of that group from an investment perspective, but I'm not in the trenches. I'm in the trenches with the alternatives group that is called Access Capital. And our thesis is democratize private equity investments with accredited investors. Underneath the holding company, we have interval funds. The funds are funded with IRAs and independent broker-dealers, and each of the funds have managers associated with it on a vertical setting. We co-invest, and we share our fees. And I have to tell you guys, I knew nothing of this. And now it's like, I'm kind of dangerous. And, passions find you, and this passion
already
found
dangerous.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's what I do today. I am an engineer by trade, and I've spent my career in technology and software. And so I always gravitate towards that. I sit on public boards, and I usually, I guess on all of them, I chair nominating governance or compensation. And I love that because the non-gov group is the one that selects that board composition. And so we have an opportunity to influence who sits on that board. And I'm very passionate about that. My boards are Lumen Technologies. You guys have seen the Lumen field here. We brought in a new CEO. She doesn't come from the telecoms market. She was at Microsoft. She's a Microsoft but she's a software woman. So she's really helping us change the go-to-market model for companies like the telecom sector. And the second board is a company called Commvault Systems. We are a cybersecurity data management group. I got on that board through an activist, Elliott Management. When I joined the board in 2018, our stock was hovering about $20. The settlement was we would refresh the board, we chair NABGov, we bring in a new CEO, and today we're hovering between $180 and $200. So it's quite a wonderful story. Also, the market is a great market for that technology. And then my third board, which is where this picture came from, and it's not out there. The picture is, but the board is not, it's Sportsman's Warehouse. And this is a retail company. We are into sporting goods. I knew nothing of this, except that it was challenging because we are into hunting, we're into fishing, and we're into protection of ourselves. That means that we sell guns and ammunition. And I chair the governance for that company. So I thought, well, instead of being on the sidelines criticizing, I want to be inside trying to figure this out along with the other retail companies. So it's a really interesting business that we do.
I think one of my favorite phone calls I received from you was, did I know any women who would be interested in a company that sells guns? I was a company. But I always appreciate your effort to get more.
That was our
people on board.
But we got one.
Well done. One of the things you said just really struck me, which is when you're comfortable, you move. I actually have a thing with the word comfortable. I really dislike it. If anyone tells me they're comfortable, I'm like, well, get out and make yourself uncomfortable. Because I find that that's when you make your biggest leaps, right? You have been involved in so many companies, both small and large. You have to evaluate when you jump in. I think one of the traits of a CEO at any stage of company, whether it's small or big, is that they are leaping forward and they're probably uncomfortable. I would love to hear some of the traits you look for and things you value in the leaders.
And some of the investments that we've made, and I call it the 6 sins of startups, because I've been in there, so triple S's. When we look at startups, or when I've jumped into working with a startup, I focus on what is the value that is being created for that customer, because I really believe that if you're focused on what the competition is doing, you're missing out. You're catching up. You're looking through the rearview mirror. And if you're focused on the problem that you're trying to solve and what that TAM looks like, then that's an interesting proposition. So the first thing I look is for that customer passion, that engagement. Can I feel what you feel as a founder of the company? Can I feel what you feel from a customer perspective? So that's important to me. I also look at the go-to-market. One of the things that I talked about is Kate Johnson became the CEO of Lumen. She doesn't come from the telco industry. I grew up in the telco industry. I was an outside plant engineer, engineering these networks, wireline with fiber and wireless, as you know, you talk with LTE. And how we engineer the networks when I graduated from engineering school in 1982 to how we engineer them today and we sell them to you has it changed. That is a scary thought, right? So somebody's going to disrupt the market, and I believe it's Lumen. That go-to-market is an interesting discussion. The second thing I look, what is your go-to-market? Is it, are your solutions product-led growth? Are your solutions based on your channels? How are you energizing the channels to execute on that good market? Are you doing direct sales? Is it a combination of all of the above? So that product, how it's engineered and how it goes to market is an interesting discussion for me. A question that I think about when I'm assessing all of this is, which is equally interesting, is how is technology impacting? But equally interesting to me is what is not going to change. And what's not going to change is that you and I are going to need to talk. You're in Miami, I'm in Seattle. And so the way that we talk might change. But that question is, I think, a pearl in every discussion. So I look at that go-to. The other thing I look into is, what is the organization like? What is that culture? I have to tell you, and this is, I'm an EQ gal. So I wear the emotions on the sleeve, although I try to pack them and leave them in a drawer. But at the end of the day, hey, I'm Cuban. It's like very hard. So there was a startup guy that is, Martha Bejar, look at this, look at that. And in that discussion, he says to me, young guy, young family, he says to me, I can hardly wait for my kids to be 18 years old to be out of the house. And I internalized on that comment and I said to him, do you really feel that way? Or because I really feel that way. And I have to tell you, I have two boys. And I'm like the drone mom. I come back home. I want to have fun places. So they're always, it's like that comment to me struck a chord. At the end of the day, we ended up not investing, not because of that. But, there are little things that I hang on to in terms of the culture. Culture is very powerful in companies, and I want to see founders that are building that culture and are paving the road for others to grow and for others to take over. I think that's important. And so I look at that culture. Then, I'm an engineer by trade. I'm into the details. I do pay a lot of attention to the financials. I remember that decimal point. I'm not as good as Hope. She chairs audit committee. She's the one that tells you on page 155, the footnote number 15. There's a spelling error. I'm not that person. Yeah. I'm not that. But I do look at the financials. I do look at the details. And I do want to see startups that are raising funds, not because they're dying, but because they're proactive. And that's important. And then just moving along, governance is important. Having a board is important. For all of you guys that are founders, reach out to your networks, ask. Having a board that allows you to think outside the box is important. And then as a founder, make time to develop your thoughts.
Okay, I have a whole list of things like that, Martha, and I would love to do that all day. But I do want to give you all the opportunities, so please. Yes.
So how do you navigate making decisions between startups that are asset light, which seem to be a dime a dozen, and then companies that are actually trying to build solutions in the built world, where we have a lot more true costs, and everybody keeps on saying same evaluations, and you're like, no, it's not the same. How do you navigate essentially built world versus digital?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and it goes back to the market. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And then based on that, you can look at the actual opportunity. Um, our country is very unique, and I will tell you in so many ways. And of course, I'm super patriotic and grateful that we're here. But we have a system of early stage investments that you don't see anywhere else. Companies like Madrona that actually, help either, scenario A or scenario B just grow. Now, when in the corporate world, when we look at investments, and we do have funds to invest, it's a little bit tougher if you don't have runway because your product is going to get homologated, you're going to get frustrated, your sales cycle is 18 months, 24 months, so you have to be smart about the market that you're targeting. Because it does take a while to get into a Lumen network with your product that is proven. And you go back to a proof of concept and you go in circles and you have to be patient with companies like that. But it's a great question, and there's not a for me. And I don't know if Hope has anything to add, but there's not a golden. There's not like a silver bullet. It really is case by case, looking at what the actual problem we're solving, and then based on that, we make the investments.
Yeah, I'll just add, just from a very tactical perspective on asset light versus you're building something. One of the things from a venture capital perspective, because I was a CFO in telecom and then I was a CFO in tech, so I did both. How much capital is going to be required by this company to get it to a point where it's getting revenue or it's profitable? Because sometimes in a VC, our funds are limited and we can't get you there. And so I feel like that's the challenge with companies that are building real things is, and I tried to dabble in the telecom space for a little bit as a VC. And I just found that it wasn't a good place because building a telecom network is so massive and so expensive that it wasn't going to be VC-backed funds that got it there. So I kind of try and look at the whole picture and see, well, what would the journey of fundraising be for this company? And is VC meant to be a part of that or not?
But there are VCs out there investing in
for sure.
in capital intensive.
You just have to find that particular fund.
And the corporate world, usually these companies have a little investment group and they look at long-term investments like that. Kristen?
Hi, Hope.
Hi.
Thanks for being here, Martha. I'm Kristen
my
Hamilton.
gosh.
Done 3 companies of my own, and I do sit on some boards, but they're late-stage private boards. And sometimes in those rooms we're talking about selling companies. And with all that's going on in the M&A space right now, I'm really curious, as you sit in these public company boardrooms, what are the conversations on the buy side in terms of the market? I know there are very different companies that you're all on, but I'm very curious to hear what's actually happening in those rooms where people are thinking about, is it not a time to buy volatility?
Quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Quite the opposite. So I think, and I see an uptake, by the way, towards the second half of the year. Looking at businesses that actually create value for the companies. I would say I'm not seeing like large acquisitions like when CenturyLink bought Level 3, who became Lumen. I'm not seeing that, but I am seeing purchases of smaller businesses that allows us to grow a little bit faster. That, ARR or the NRR or the GRR. So I am seeing quite a bit of activity picking up. And these companies, listen, are always looking. They're always looking. It doesn't stop. Now, the acquisitions are so tiny that usually we don't make big announcements about. But there's a lot of activity going on.
What size? Typically.
I want to say 10 to 20 million.
Mm-hmm. Little tuck-ins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that becomes so much more for the company. But there's quite a bit of activity.
So you're not expecting accretive investments, but just like levers to grow the concern.
Levers to grow. That's a great way to put it. And I would say that a lot of it is around efficiencies. How can we get our product out there quicker, hassle-free, customer-friendly? It's that sort of investment.
There's someone in the back, yeah. And then Jay will get to you next.
Oh, thank you.
But if you have something, come and talk to me.
Analyst at Pitchfork. So I have a question for Martha. So you mentioned your investment thesis revolves around the democratization of PE for accredited investors. There's two major themes that are emerging around private markets. One is the public-private market convergence, and then the second is the rise of alts, the democratization of alts. And I wanted to ask, how is your firm capitalizing on both of these trends or just one? And it seems like the democratization of alts trend, with the private credit ETF that came out recently, and Apollo and State Street launching their second private credit ETF. How is your firm strategy evolving to capitalize on these trends?
That's such a great question. So it's the latter, that democratizing of private equity investment. I would say this. When I joined Joe to do this, we were stubborn about our vision or stubborn about our strategy. But as we started executing, you've got to be flexible. And that's just not us. It should be across the board. You're running a business, you're passionate about what you're doing, and as you're executing, there are changes in the market, and you have to then kind of, be flexible in that execution and make some changes. For us, Access Capital, we started with business development corporations. And that's what I call Hope. And I said, what the heck is this? And then I started to learn about it. And we actually pivoted and we registered them. The SEC, we pivoted to interval funds. And the problem that we were trying to solve was twofold. Number one, give access to the accredited investors, but also give them liquidity. And an interval fund that is publicly registered, privately held by us, with an independent board, we're able to do those two things, and we do it on a quarterly basis as a percent of NAV. So if everybody calls it, you can't do all of them, so we'll do, a portion of that until you can. But it gives that access to that investor. Now, I mentioned that these are evergreen funds, and we're working with a network, a distribution network of IRAs and independent broker-dealers. And because we did not have a track record, we associated ourselves with managers for private equity. The second fund is opportunistic credit. We're doing 3 more funds, 2 more funds this summer, and 1 more at the end of the year. And those managers bring the opportunity to us. And then we trust but verify, and with our team, we say, yeah, we want to co-invest, and we'll share the management fee and the carry with that manager. So it's a little bit of a different model. One of the things that I would say is that KKR, the Apollos of this world, are talking to us. I think it's a very interesting market because it's so huge and is untapped. And markets are made when you have multiple entrants, in the market, and let the best man or woman win. So we're excited about that. One of the things I learned when I was at Microsoft, and I will tell you this, I love Microsoft. I know you do as well. Great company. But we would spend, there's a but. We would spend a good chunk of our time in a war room thinking, how do we get rid of this? At that time, it's no longer like that. How do we get rid of SAP? How do we get rid of Oracle? How do we get rid of Apple? And we were not talking about that empty seat in the boardroom that represented a customer. And they lost some market share. And then came Satya, and before it was Windows, is the era that we breathed, quote unquote, and he pivoted. to a great platform that touches a lot of wet noses called Azure. And so it's important to look at the market, but it's also important as you look at the market and the competition is how do you get to that market in a way that is intuitive and hassle-free and safe, because that accredits an investor. If I invest 50,000, 250,000, 10,000, whatever the number is, I want it to be safe. I want it to be able to call. I don't have as much wiggle room as a QP, and so we at Access Capital we solve for those problems. It's a little bit of a different one.
We have time for one more. So Jay.
Right, you guys were talking about tiny acquisitions before, right? So I just had a question. Are these mainly just like, pure acquisitions, or are a lot of them like acqui-hires, right? Like, how exactly do you guys manage resources? That was basically my question.
Yeah, so it was really about more specifics on the smaller acquisition question
Right.
and how they managed.
So, I mean, we do both, and with our companies, it depends. I mean, depending how straightforward it is, then what I do, acquire the entire business, or we do a little bit of an investment and we help it grow. So it really depends. But it's a great question. I mean, we have all those questions where we're thinking through our investments and where to make big bets. And with us, there are the extremes. I mean, we are in Miami after all, and so it's an interesting discussion. One thing I will say at Dagrosa Capital, one of the reasons why you're seeing what you're seeing in Miami, as well, not 100% obviously, but the mayor of Miami has been pushing a lot of the digitalization, especially around fintech in Miami. And he's part of our practice. I mean, think about that. And we lived here 17 years. And you don't do that in Seattle. It's just, I wouldn't say it's a weak structure with the mayor because he's very influential, but he doesn't have a vote. So he sits on our practice. As long as there are no conflicts, everything is great. But it's a very interesting voice to listen to as we do companies that we use.
Okay, well, you all, I think there's still some good wine.
Yeah, so thank you.